Hello and welcome to Naval Horizons. I'm Samina Mondal, a public affairs intern with the U.S. Naval Research Laboratory, part of the Naval Research Enterprise. Today, I have the absolute pleasure of being joined by Mariah Arias-Thode, a senior environmental microbiologist with the U.S. Navy at the Naval Information Warfare Center Pacific, located in San Diego, California. Thank you so much for joining us, Mariah.
Oh, thank you so much. I truly am honored that you all have decided to listen or learn about environmental microbiology. So I'm very excited.
Of course. So let's jump right in. How exactly did you get your start in the Department of the Navy?
So I received my PhD from the University of California in San Diego, Scripps Institution of Oceanography. It's a long one, I know. Essentially, they're the oceanographic school for PhD and master's students interested in oceanography. So when I was there during my first year, we wrote a proposal to the Office of Naval Research, and it was on using bacteria for the detoxification of chromium. So chromium is a heavy metal. She put us in touch, and that was Dr. Linda Christie, who's fantastic, fabulous, and now she's over at DARPA. She put us in touch with Dr. Bart Chadwick. He's one of the smartest men that I've ever met in oceanography and engineering and so on. And so he led us and showed us on how to take core samples and gave us basic information on what we would be doing and how we could do a project with them. So it was a really nice first-hand experience for me to actually even see the Navy. I didn't, honestly, I lived in San Diego, didn't realize we had this group here in San Diego. So it was a really nice way for us to integrate. And throughout my time with them, we would talk to them once a year at least and get information on, they were working on copper decontamination and trying to reduce the effects of copper on that might be coming in from Navy ships or other things of that sort. And we were working on chromium. So when I went for a postdoctoral position, I was looking around and I decided to apply here because, to be honest, I was excited that the Navy would be funding somebody on cleaning up the environment, right? Because most of the time you think about militaries not caring, but that's absolutely not true. And when I started with the Navy, it was very exciting to me that they had a big plan and a big vision to try and wean us off of oil and things of that sort. They're one of the first services to actually look at using this biodiesel, things of that, so that we can use alternative sources for energy. And so I was very excited that there was such a place, and I felt that that was a magic fit or a perfect fit for me.
Can you walk us through a little bit more about your academic background that led you to the positions you're at today?
So I went to a junior college first because that was accessible to me. And then from there, I went to University of Texas at Pan American. Then I went to the University of Texas at San Antonio because at that time they put in a lot of money into the biomedical program at UT San Antonio. And I remember thinking, if I went to UT San Antonio, I could probably work in a lab and it wouldn't be as competitive had I gone to UT Austin. So yes, UT Austin's probably a better school, but I wanted to be able to work in a lab. So for my first years, I actually worked on cancer research. It was interesting, but I felt that there were so many other people doing it and it was really hard to know what everybody was doing. And so I felt it was overwhelming. So one of the internships that I did was looking at microorganisms. So it was a microbiology lab, and they were looking to see the effects of Vibrio vulnificus on humans, right? And like how it was toxic to them and it could kill them. And I was really so flabbergasted that something so small could kill somebody within a matter of days. And I remember thinking, could that same thing also help people? And so then, through long story short, I was really interested in the environment, and I did an internship. I found an internship at Scripps Institute of Oceanography. And in that lab, this gentleman, Dr. Thibault, was looking at using microorganisms. Could we use them to detoxify contaminants in the environment? And that's when I was hooked, you know, because I liked the cancer research aspect, absolutely. But this, using it for the environment, there weren't as many people, and I felt there was so much more to be explored, especially in the marine environment, when I found out that we know less about the ocean than we do about space. That's mind-blowing, especially because it's right here. You know, so I decided then, and I say this, and I will say this at the end, I got into Scripps the back door. Okay, so Scripps Institute of Oceanography is a really fantastic institution, but I wanted to be there. And so I worked very hard, and my professor saw me on weekends working in the lab, and he's like, well, what are you doing here? And I said, well, you know, I wanted to see how this experiment was turning out, and I want to make sure that I'm doing well and whatever, right? So he really liked my persistence, because I was competing with people from Harvard, MIT, Yale, everywhere else. And I remember thinking, I'll never get into this school, but whatever, I'm just going to do the best that I can. And so they let me in based on that, which honestly is a really, you know, I want to tell people, if you like something, show up and show them and take the initiative. And I'll talk more about that later, but I really do think it was my initiative that led me to go into Scripps. And with that, you know, I'm going to tell something too, that we had a first year exam, and I actually failed half of that exam. Okay, I don't tell that very often, but I think it's important, because not everybody is everything, and sometimes you have to struggle. And I was asked, do you want to do it again? And so I actually said, yes. You know, I felt like, bring it on. You know, so it was hard. It was really hard. But I was allowed to retake the exam and take classes. And after all that, I walked out the front door. Right. So yes, it was hard. And yes, I did cry many nights. And yes, I did wonder. And I did have that feeling like, do I really belong here? Maybe I should just give up. But, you know, luckily my advisor actually told me once that he was very proud of me. And I think that does a lot for people if you let them know, because had he not said that, I probably wouldn't have continued on. And it's funny how those words can really help. So anyway, you know, I was there, and like I said, I did this work on the detoxification of chromium in marine sediments. And then that led me with this career with the Navy. So it all was a really nice play, because he introduced me to Dr. Bart Chadwick, who was at the Navy lab, and that helps. So I really implore, introduce everybody, to everyone, because you never know that key introduction.
So as I understand, Mariah, you have done many different projects and also served many different roles within those. So could you talk to us a little bit about the science and technology topics that are specifically embedded within your work on a day-to-day basis?
Initially, I was working on contaminated sediments, but then the Office of Naval Research wanted to look at these microbial fuel cells, as people in the academic labs were working on them. And she said, hey, I'm funding this line of effort to get energy from mud. Can you help us with that? And can you put these in the field and see what happens? And so academic labs are absolutely key and important to look at the basics and understand how that works, right? Like, how are these bacteria donating these electrons and so on? We took them in the field, and one of the things people don't understand is there's water, which causes corrosion, and things break, and there's weather and current and all that. So we were able to tie that technology. And so if you don't mind, I would also like to explain what a microbial fuel cell is. A microbial fuel cell is essentially a biological battery. And batteries function by having that negative interact with a positive, and right, it's that charge potential that drives battery technology. And you've seen it on your batteries. You have the plus sign and the minus sign. Well, that's how batteries work. I mean, that's the easy part, okay? There's a lot more science to this, but that's basically it, the difference between the negative and the positive charge. A microbial fuel cell essentially is a biological battery where you bury the anode, or you have it in an anaerobic environment, and you electrically connect it to a cathode, which is in the positive environment. So the anode is in the mud, and the cathode is in the water column. Bacteria then will donate electrons to the anode, where the electrons are reduced to the cathode, and you can actually extract that energy. So microorganisms like you and I need to respire. They require terminal electron acceptor, terminal electron donor. In your case and in my case, we use oxygen as our terminal electron acceptor, glucose is our donor, sometimes glucose in the form of pizza, but it still ends up being glucose. The same for microorganisms. They need food and they need a terminal electron acceptor. Most microorganisms that you're familiar with will use oxygen as their terminal electron acceptor. Those are called aerobic microorganisms. There's a group of microorganisms, though, that are called anaerobes, and they can't use oxygen. It's actually toxic to them. So those are anaerobes. Those microorganisms are constantly looking for a place to donate that terminal electron. So for example, you have, if you think of a marine environment and in the sediment, they're constantly looking for either, like for example, an iron 3 particle that gets reduced to iron 2, or sulfate that gets reduced to sulfide. And many of you know that sulfide smell. You've seen it in a stagnant pond. You put your foot in it, then that smell goes, you're like, wow, what is that? It smells like rotten eggs. That is sulfide. So the same anaerobic microorganisms can use those. But if you bury this anode and you electrically connect it to a cathode, they can now use that oxygen indirectly. Therefore, it's what's called thermodynamically favorable. It actually is beneficial to them to use that anode because now they don't have to constantly swim, right? So now you have a house, you have a place where they can just stay, donate that electron, we're able to capture those electrons and make electricity. Now all you need is food. In a marine environment, you have pore water going through the pores of the sand, the grains of sand, and that brings in fresh food. So we have had microbial fuel cells out there in the field for 3 years, and they're still producing electricity. It's not a lot of electricity. We're never going to power a submarine, but you can have power enough to power environmental sensors. And so that's what I've been working on for the last probably 10 years is how do we extract that power in a better way? How can you increase surface area? How can you make it to where it's easy to put in? Because I often am the one putting these in, right? And I'm not like a big burly soldier, you know? And how do you make it simple for the end user?
And so based on your 10 years of research, what are the exact naval challenges that you look forward to providing a solution for or even accomplishing?
We're trying to power sensors underwater. Oftentimes the sensors that you want might be, like I mentioned, 2,000 meters below the sea surface. So you cannot hook that up to a solar panel, right? That's a long cable. That would be a really long cable. So therefore, if you can use something like this that can drop down to the sea floor and just have power for years, you don't have to change the batteries. You don't have to go out there on a ship and refurbish something or try and use a robot to grab that sensor and put in the batteries again. You know, all that is expensive. So you can see where this can really help you to have awareness for everything. And it's not only good for DoD purposes, by the way. We've been able to power environmental sensors like pH, temperature, and oxygen. And so we actually have a small company that's trying to form in this area because for those of you that have seen or have a pool, if you measure pH, you're constantly measuring pH because that is it's just a measure of hydrogen ions, but it tells you if something's wrong. It's a really nice indicator. It's a simple indicator to tell you that something's wrong. So you can see where we can use these in aquaculture farms, for example, where they have all these fish farms, or they want to detect earthquakes, right, for tsunamis. Things like that. So you can put them out there and you can power very small sensors that can tell you a lot of information. Something else that we're working on is how do you get that information back to you in real time? And we've actually done that where we powered a pH, temperature, and oxygen sensor in a riverine environment. And we had, it was recording these data every 15 minutes and sending that data back home to me every day. So every 24 hours, I would get the message of like, hey, the pH and temperature are this. And so you could follow long-term data, which is important even for climate change. It's important for a lot of things. As well, we were receiving text messages when the pH was above or below a certain threshold. And that happened to us here in Camp Pendleton. We had one of our 100-year storms, and that's how we could pick it up, because it was like the pH went, it got higher because the water became stagnant. It was super hot, and then a big storm came in. So it was a really cool thing to see, but it is really important so we can get real-time information back to us. So you can use this in, again, many different areas. And we've also been able to power magnetometer, which will tell us when a ship is passing. So you can see that for harbor security, for example. You're the harbor security master. You see ships come in and you're like, oh, okay, the magnetometer went off. Yep, I'm expecting that ship at noon. Magnetometer went off. Yep, I'm expecting that ship at 1. And then magnetometer goes off and you're like, I'm not expecting anything. What's going on, right? It could be a submarine. So it's kind of a neat way to have that. And as well, something I wanted to tie into the oceanography part. Right now for oceanography, especially for climate change, they're measuring these parameters all the time. To go out there in the deep, though, one of the things that they do, they're called discrete sampling. So in other words, you take a ship, it's expensive, sometimes $50,000 a day. You go out there for 2 weeks and then you take measurements. And so you know the measurement at that time of day in that space. It's really hard to have full coverage though. So with these kind of microbial fuel cell technologies, just powering that constantly and sending you that data, that gives you a long-term data set, which is very important for environmental purposes.
So Mariah, looking forward, how do you see the science and technology in your career field specifically transforming the future?
Thank you for that question. So the way that I see the microbial fuel cell technology as having a key role in the future, number one, it's a green technology. So even if we put in things today, and let's say just because of earthquakes and storms and so on, they come out and they're just rolling around in the ocean. It's carbon cloth, titanium, and plastic. None of this is toxic to the environment. So that makes me feel really good about not polluting our earth, because as you know, sometimes somebody comes up with a great idea and then oops, 50 years down the line, it's not a good idea. So I could see where they would use this technology for the Internet of Things. We wish to know information about everything everywhere all the time, and we're already living it. But I can see where in the future, let's say that countries such as these smaller islands where tsunamis are a big issue, maybe they can use these to actually power sensors underwater that might detect tsunamis, and they can give that information in real time. That way they have at least 10 minutes or 20 minutes of a head start versus 5. So I can see where this can go that way. At this time right now, I don't know if there is a sensor for tsunami, but for those of you out there, maybe there is, and maybe you can come up with that. Another key point is that our group is working on is just sensor technology in general, decreasing the power requirements. So for example, in my lifetime, maybe not yours, but we used to have a 100-watt light bulb. And now we're using these LEDs, which I think are on the order of less than 1 watt. So that's pretty cool, right? And so for those of you out there that are looking at future technologies, decreasing power requirements will decrease our reliance on oil and so on and so forth. So I think that's a really neat place to be looking as well.
Thank you for such an amazing conversation, Mariah. It's clear that all the elements of your story that you've described, you are a true testament to in the Department of the Navy. So thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. I sincerely appreciate, and I love that y'all care about bacteria, because I love bacteria. So I think this is one way that we can help our natural resources. So I appreciate that.
And thank you all at home for watching. Be sure to check out future and past Naval Horizons episodes. And until next time, I'm Samina, and this is Naval Horizons.